This is Blake Toppmeyer with the Knoxville News Sentinel, and we're talking about Rashaan Gaulden.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that is wonderful to hear. All right. So, look, the Carolina Panthers go in and we drafted 6 defensive backs in the last 3 years. And then somehow in this draft, we're stunned. Guys, 2 names that were not high or on people's radar in the draft guru world of Carolina Panthers. Dante Jackson from LSU, and then Rashaan Gaulden in the 3rd round. Can you tell us a little bit about Gaulden as a player and what you've seen from him?
Well, he's a guy that's around the football a lot. You look at his numbers that he put up at the combine, and you're not going to be overly impressed. He's not a tester, not someone that excels in that area. I definitely think he's a film guy. When you look at his play on the field, that's when you start to get impressed. He forced 3 fumbles last year, recovered 3 fumbles, had an interception, and that just kind of tells you someone that's around the ball a lot, making plays, pretty physical player, played nickel back for Tennessee, and for folks who don't know, nickel was Tennessee's base package, so this wasn't like he was a 3rd down defender. That's what Tennessee played. They played nickel defense, so he was out there all the time, and really was Tennessee's best defensive player by leaps and bounds last year.
He's 6'1", 197 pounds. This is interesting, guys. He went to Independence High School, Charlotte guy, and is this a guy that you could see convert into safety at any point, maybe?
Yeah, I think in the NFL, if he's going to play corner or safety is the logical spot. I don't think he has the speed to play at the cornerback position. He has the length, at 6'1", he's got the size that you would like as a corner, but I question whether he can have the speed that's necessary. But I definitely think he projects more as a safety rather than a corner, or he could stay as a nickel guy. I think Carolina would like to see him contend for one of those safety spots, and if he doesn't end up there, early in his career, will be a nickel or special teams guy. I would be surprised if he plays cornerback in the NFL, although he did play some cornerback at Tennessee. He certainly played more nickel. That was his primary position, and he played a little bit of safety as well. And I do think in the pros that safety probably projects his more natural position.
Do you think that lends more to free safety, or he seems like he has the length to be a nice free safety, or is he going to be a guy that is going to put his head down and get in the box and tackle?
It's hard to say, but he's so physical that I do think he would project nicely as a strong safety as well. I mean, this is someone who, you got some defensive backs aren't real interested in mixing it up in the run game, and I would say that's one of Gaulden's strengths is being physical, providing run support. I mean, really for Tennessee, he was sort of that hybrid position that you're starting to see a lot more now in college football and even to some extent in the NFL as well, where it's like, are these guys an outside linebacker? Are they a nickel? They kind of have to be both, because the days of rotating out your 3rd linebacker for a nickel is pretty much over, especially in the high-tempo offenses that you see in college football now. You need one guy who can do both. And so really Gaulden was kind of that hybrid position between outside linebacker and nickel, because he was a 3-down player. And so, again, that just kind of speaks to what he was able to do in run support and in his physicality.
Yeah, one thing they're doing a lot in the NFL is putting 3 safeties out there now and putting a little bit more of kind of a guy that can run a little bit, not like a speed guy, but a guy that's going to play in between like you said, this nickel position and what would be a traditional safety role. And they're playing the nickel with 3 safeties and 2 corners. It's one way that some of the things. So we have some questions in the chat room for you right now. And one of the questions is people are interested in him as a future leader of the secondary. Do you see this as an individual, as the personality and the confidence to be kind of the general of that backfield for defense?
I think it's a possibility. He's a well-spoken guy. At the college level, it's so much harder, I think, to get a feel for these guys maybe than sometimes in the pros. There's no open locker room in college, and access, especially in the SEC, is pretty restricted. So, I mean, I can tell you that I've talked to Rashaan Gaulden a handful of times, and that's kind of what I'm basing my knowledge of him personally and character-wise on. I will say one thing that I thought was interesting. You go back to last fall, and of course, the moments that a lot of people will remember about Rashaan Gaulden's career, and I don't think he wants this, is him giving the middle finger to the Alabama crowd after Tennessee scored its lone touchdown in last fall's game. Obviously, not a good look for Gaulden. What I was impressed with was how he responded to that. He came out and faced the music after that game, addressed the media with an apology to both Alabama and Tennessee fans. And then I think it's really easy sometimes to, after you do something stupid, to come out and kind of read a statement and then turn around and walk away. But I guess what impressed me more was after he was finished offering an apology, he stood and answered questions about that. And I thought that took a little something to do that. And then at the combine, he was asked about that incident. And then at Pro Day, he was asked about that incident. And he had to know those questions were coming. But even when you know that's coming, sometimes, guys don't handle it real well. And I thought that he handled those questions well and said that he hopes that's not what he's remembered for in his Tennessee career. And I think it was just kind of a stupid decision in the moment, and he admits as much. But so you think about that action, it's like, well, the initial action is not something that you think of leadership guy. On the other hand, it does seem to be kind of an out of character thing for him. And you look at the way he responded, and I think a lot of people actually kind of gained some respect for the way he addressed his mistake.
Well, certainly comes out a year early, so he's not the oldest guy on the field by any means. And I do agree with you 100%. It seems like leadership in so many ways has less to do with you just making every perfect step and really figuring a way to get back on the path and and keep your head up through adversity. So that speaks a lot to him. Joe, you got to help go jump in there and ask Blake some questions, because I know Rashaan Gaulden is Joe's favorite player in this draft.
Blake, this is Joey. We've been trying to make this whole thing work here, and I do appreciate you being able to come on and spend some time with us.
Sure.
I like the fact that he did this. Yes, it was dumb, it was out of character, but when he did it, was it in Alabama or was it a home game for Tennessee?
It was in Alabama, and Alabama was steamrolling Tennessee 40-0 in the game. Yeah, it was Tennessee's only touchdown, if I remember correctly. It was a pick six. Gaulden did not have the interception. He was kind of, I guess, providing an escort to the end zone. And then, after the touchdown, he's standing there in the end zone kind of looking up at some Alabama fans and gave the middle finger salute, which was just sort of bizarre because, he wouldn't have been the guy on the roster that I think he would have picked. If someone was going to do that, I don't think he would have been among my top 5 choices. And also just like the state of the game, it's like Tennessee was getting destroyed.
So the middle finger's back to you, buddy.
I like the fact that he did it because it just shows brashness. He had to, I'm sure he was angry and fired up because they were getting,
pummeled.
Kind of goes to that old statement, show me a good loser and I'll show you a loser, right?
Right.
So
and
you got to control
I'm sure it was out of frustration. Right. And he did go back and address it, but still, to have the gall to go there in their place and do that, just, I want a guy like that on the field with me.
Like Cody Lashney says in the YouTube chat room, says if he does that week 2 in Atlanta, we'll all be excited.
I can agree with that for sure. Okay, so you see him being able to make the transition to the NFL.
I think so. Yeah. I think this was a guy that was. I think him coming out early was a good call. In that, I don't know. I mean, he only went in the 3rd round. I guess the argument could be made. Well, what happens if he comes back? Is he a 1st round or 2nd round guy? But I'm not sure that he is because, again, I go back to. He's not a tester. I don't think he's someone that a year later would have dazzled people at the combine when he didn't, perform so poorly in terms of the tests at the combine this year. So I don't think that would have made much difference. And then you look at what he put on film. He had about as good of a season as you could probably have last year for playing for a terrible defense. I mean, Tennessee's defense last year was not good at all. I mean, he was playing for a 4-8 team and was really one of the silver linings on that defense. And you look at some of the more analytical websites, Pro Football Focus does a nice job of providing some advanced stats. And throughout the SEC season, Rashaan Gaulden was one of the most highly rated defensive backs in the SEC by Pro Football Focus's analytics. And, I think you would have seen him, perhaps wind up on some all-conference lists if the nickelback position was designated, on all conference selections. When people are voting for these all conference teams, you got votings for, 2 cornerbacks and 2 safeties. It's like, well, where do you can't really vote for this guy who's one of the better nickels in the conference. But, I think it probably was a good call for him to go out early. Tennessee had 3 players who declared early for the draft. The other 2 did not get selected until the 6th round. So you could have the debate that maybe they should have come back, but for Rashaan Gaulden, I think the time was right. I think he was ready to make this transition.
Boy, you're not lying with the poor testing when it comes to 40-yard dash, 4.61, 8. This is where I would be embarrassed. 8 reps on the bench. Is that you're going into? You got some dang spaghetti arms right there. 30-inch vertical jump. And that's, over everything else is just, but you know what? Those numbers, they might seem poor for a corner, in that area, but maybe those numbers fit better. He puts on 10 more pounds. All of a sudden, you got a nice, strong safety that can do like you said.
That's not a whole lot different than Josh Norman's combine numbers, right? I mean, you go back and look, it's not a whole lot different, but yeah, I think safety is where he's going to have to excel, because I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard he tested in the bottom 2% of the combine in total athleticism. So, yeah, he's going to have to be somebody that, really just knows how to be in the right position at the right time and, has a very high football IQ to be successful.
Yeah, and I'd say that kind of describes the way he played at Tennessee. Like I said, the biggest thing, if I had to sum him up in like one sentence, it's that he's always around the football, and that's really what stood out to me about last season was you had a guy that was involved in 7 takeaways for Tennessee's defense between the 3 forced fumbles, the 3 recovered fumbles, and then 1 interception, so that speaks to that. Also his tackles, he had 65 tackles, which is pretty good when you think about the nickelback position in a 12-game season. 65 tackles is a good spot to be there. So those are the things that jumped out about him. And it wasn't those things, some guys get the forced turnovers and it's like, they were a ghost the rest of the game. It's like, well, they had an interception, and that wasn't Gaulden. He was, you looked at the end of every play, and it was like he was one of the guys that was kind of coming out of the pile. He just, as I said, he was always around the football. You look at it, Tennessee last year had 15 takeaways, and he had a hand in 7. So nearly half of those takeaways he was involved.
That's a telling statistic right there.
Blake, would you say that he is a talker? Is he somebody that's going to be yapping on the field, or was that out of character?
That would be different for him. He's a well-spoken guy, as I said. When you get a chance to hear from him, he's just explains himself very well and puts himself into words very nicely. But in terms of on the field, running his mouth, trash talking, that really is not something that stood out to him. And I don't know, maybe it was because he didn't play cornerback, so he's not lined up across from, the top receivers in the SEC. I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. A lot of times those trash talkers seem to be at the cornerback position, whereas he was, lined up more as that in the slot or, sometimes even in the box. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but he just doesn't seem to me to be that that trash talker. I don't think.
Well, I think one of the it's not necessarily that fans are looking for that, but I think one of the things that the Carolina Panthers secondary has lacked in the last 2 years since we parted ways with Josh Norman and then drafted 3 defensive backs in a corner, James Bradbury being one of those in the second round, who's a very soft-spoken guy. We haven't produced a lot of takeaways like you mentioned, and Rashaan Gaulden has been involved in. And a lot of people have kind of contributed that to a lack of confidence, and swagger is the catchword that they're using. But one of the things that people are talking about that they like you're saying in the chat room is, sounds like this kid's got some football instincts, and that tends to shine through over those 8 reps on the bench. He's not going to be playing offensive line, as Slim J said in the chat room.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Those 8 reps really. I mean, you almost looked at the number and you couldn't believe it, because when you see a number like that, I generally think, well, those numbers are associated with guys who you think, well, they're soft players. I mean, I don't know if that's fair or unfair, but guys that don't test well on the bench at the combine, what do you think? Well, he's a soft player or something like that. But that was not something that you would use to describe Rashaan Gaulden, and so. That doesn't really mesh up for whatever reason. I guess he just bench press is not an area that he excels in. But, what says something to me, too, is that, you looked at some of the more reputable mock drafts going into the drafts, and he was on two of the mock drafts, that I look at was projected as a 3rd-round pick, and I think someone else had him as a 4th-round pick. So despite those terrible combine scores, NFL evaluators thought enough of him that he was being viewed out there as a 3rd or 4th round guy. So it just makes you think, if he was a tester, maybe this is a guy that could go in as high as a 2nd round perhaps. Right. But the fact that he wasn't a tester, maybe made him slide down to the 3rd round.
Well, that is still one more bench press than Dante Jackson did.
Oh God, another one with spaghetti arms.
Well, you know what they say is, no matter what happens at the combine, the tape doesn't lie, film doesn't lie, and you can see it on the film. You can tell the guy's a football player. He knows where to be, when to be, and he knows where the ball is. And that's what you need in a safety. You need somebody that can read, recognize, and react.
Yep, that ball hawk instinct is not something you can teach,
Right.
All right, Blake, tell us this. Just last question to get you out of here was, you said that the Tennessee defense was just trashy. You didn't say those words. I'm using those words. But what's the outlook for Tennessee going forward?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, you got a first-year coach this year with Jeremy Pruitt, the former Alabama defensive coordinator, and I think there is the hope around Knoxville in this fan base that the corner will be turned, and that with Philip Fulmer back as the athletic director, that maybe they can get back to the glory days of the Fulmer era. And you look at Jeremy Pruitt, the coach that they hired from Alabama. He's been a part of 5 national championship teams, and those aren't just at Alabama. He's got 3 rings from his days at Bama. He's got a ring from Florida State as well, where he was the defensive coordinator of that team that won the national title. So now on the flip side, he has no head coaching experience, and that's at any level. He's never been a head coach in high school, small college, nothing. He's he's always been an assistant. But I think Tennessee fans are hoping this is a Kirby Smart type hire, another former Nick Saban guy who's done great things in 2 years at Georgia, obviously.
Yeah,
but
tremendous.
I think Tennessee is going to struggle this year. I think it's going to be hard to just happen overnight. You look at what they return, and there's a lot of warts on this team. If he makes a bowl game this year, I think that'll be an achievement. But long term, it's too early to tell whether they got the right guy. But I think you can see in his background that he's had success everywhere he's been. Now, a lot of people have had success when they've coached under Nick Saban, but he's done it he was a defensive coordinator at Florida State, had the number 1 ranked defense, had the number 1 ranked defense as a defensive coordinator at Georgia, and at Alabama. So I think the hope is there among ball fans that they got the right guy to turn things around.
I think one of the problems Tennessee has had, and correct me if I'm wrong, but recruiting has been an issue, has it not?
Well, Butch Jones had some really good classes there. It was developing those guys into a player that was kind of worthy of that star ranking. I mean, you look at this year's NFL draft, and you guys might saw that Khalil McKenzie was a 6th-round draft pick by the Kansas City Chiefs, and he was a prime example. He was a 5-star prospect when he signed with Tennessee. I mean, considered to be a major get, and then just never really developed into a dominant player. And sure, now he's a pro, but when they got him, I think you're probably thinking he's someone that's going to be a future 1st, 2nd, 3rd round draft pick, and he winds up as a 6th-round project player for the Chiefs. And there was just a little bit too much of that during Jones's tenure. But you also, it is easy to kind of kick some dirt on Butch Jones, but I will say that overall, I think he made a lot of improvements at Tennessee. I mean, it was sort of a mess when he picked up the reins after the 1-year Lane Kiffin experiment, and then Derek Dooley was kind of a disaster for his 3 seasons at Tennessee. And so before last season, Butch Jones sort of had some momentum going in the right direction, and then last year just got off the rails, and they had to make a change, and that was the right move.
I want to ask one more thing, and then I promise that's it. Has Tennessee lost the mystique they had when Fulmer was around?
To some extent, yes, I think so. You look at some of these programs out there that are chasing ghosts a little bit. You think about Tennessee, you think about Nebraska, you think to a certain extent about Miami, although Mark Richt, did some good things at Miami last year. But you think about those 3 programs that were all dominant programs in the 90s, and they just haven't gotten back to that point. You look at what Tennessee's done in the last 10 years in particular, and it's not real impressive. But I will say this, I think there's the potential for Tennessee to get back to, I'm not saying maybe as dominant as they were in the 90s, that could be a stretch, but to get back to relevance where we're talking about a top 20 team on a regular basis, because, Knoxville is a short drive to fertile recruiting grounds in Georgia and Alabama, and a lot of those southern states. And the state of Tennessee is producing more football talent than it was 5-10 years ago, even within the borders. And so I think the opportunity is there if you get the right staff in place, to get back to relevance. And you also look at the SEC East right now, and there's some room to make some hay in that side of the league. I mean, I think Georgia's here to stay. I don't think they're going anywhere. And you do have to wonder if Dan Mullen can elevate Florida a little bit. But overall, there's no question that that you can make up some ground in the East more so than in the West. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think Tennessee can get back to the point of national relevance. Whether they can get back to the 90s or not, that's a much taller task.
Yeah, talk about 2 programs that really kind of have, I think, similar stories, and that is Nebraska and Tennessee. And that is, you've gone from the top to just searching to find relevance. Maybe Nebraska's had a little bit better luck at times. We had Jason Peter on this podcast at one point, a former 1st-round draft pick by the Carolina Panthers. He played on that 98 Nebraska team. Didn't they play – was that Peyton Manning's team they played that year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yes.
So pretty interesting. All right, Blake, that's Blake Toppmeyer. Blake, can you tell us how people can follow you on Twitter? Because we got a really loyal listener group that's always searching for news, and they're already asking, do you cover the Titans? So could you tell us your Twitter handle?
Yeah, my Twitter handle is @btoppmeyer, and you can read my content at knoxnews.com or Tennessean.com. I do not cover the Titans. I work for the same company that owns the Tennessean, and so I cover the Tennessee Vols for the Knoxville News Sentinel and the Tennessean, but we have a very quality Titans writer named Jason Wolf, who you can read if you go to the Tennessean's website. So you can, if you go there, you can check out my stuff on the Vols and check out his stuff on the Titans.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Blake. You have a good night.
Thank you, Blake. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, man.
All right, that's Blake Toppmeyer of the Knoxville News Sentinel. and we were discussing Rashaan Gaulden. We talked